Parshas Vayishlach, we have the terrible story of Shechem and Dinah. In response to what Shechem did to Dinah, Yaakov's sons, the brothers of Dinah, made an elaborate plan, as we all know. They deceived the people of Shechem, who had a bris, and then at the time of their vulnerability, they attacked them and they destroyed them. Yaakov Avinu reacted very strongly to what they had done. How are you doing this, Lavisheni, that you're going to spoil my reputation and my presentation before the nations that surround? Yaakov Avinu was furious at them for the trickery, for the deceit. And the question we have to ask ourselves is that Yaakov Avinu, who is, yes, Emes Yaakov, the celebrator of truth, the one who is associated with truth, but Yaakov Avinu, in other situations, had done things and said things which were also misleading. And whether it was in taking the brachos, which Yitzchak had intended for Esav, whether it was in his dealings with Lavan, in some of his dealings with Lavan Ha'arami. Now, we understand that Yaakov Avinu cared about truth, but what's the answer? What's the idea? Why is it that Yaakov Avinu was able to say, Anaychi Esav b'chayrecha, I am Esav, your firstborn, even with whatever kind of punctuation you put in there to mitigate it? How did Yaakov Avinu say such a thing? So as is explained, as the Rishonim, as the Radak, for example, on that pasuk explains, it's not a failure of Midas HaEmes, it's not a failure of truth when the silence or allowing things to happen would produce something which is so fundamentally false as Esav stepping in to be leader of the world. It's not a compromise in Midas HaEmes to use a change of words b'mkay meskela in places like this. Very tricky principle, one which we have to be very, very guarded about applying. The end justifying the means is a very, very tricky thing. But yes, Yaakov Avinu did it. He did it in that place. He did it to a certain degree with Lavan Ha'arami. And the story of Shechem and Dinah was any less tragic, was any less difficult. Arguably, one could say that it was worse. And the brothers here did something deceitful, but they did something in order to be able to rescue Dinah, in order to be able to maintain the purity of the family. Hakizona yasa sachosenu. Why was Yaakov Avinu so upset here when he had done similar things himself? That's a question that we'd like to address, that we need to address. Now, the answer that perhaps could present itself can be seen in a Gemara, or we could start with a Gemara, the Gemara in Maseches Gittin Daf Mem Vav, where the Gemara speaks about a story which Chazal themselves linked to the story of Shechem. The story that happened with the Givonim in the days of Yehoshua, when the Jewish people were sweeping into Eretz Canaan, and they had a mandate of conquering the land with destruction, and a nation, the Givonim, pretended to come from afar. They got dressed up, made themselves look as if they had come from a distant land, inspired by the miracles associated with Klal Yisrael, when in fact they had come from around the corner and were just scared for their lives. They pledged allegiance to the Rabbeinu Shalom. They were embraced by the Jewish people who didn't suspect them or doubt their story, and then we found out about it later. Next day, the Jewish people found out. And Yoshua did not attack them, did not destroy them. He kept them in the Jewish people with some sacrifices. Shoavei mayim, chodvei eitzim. They were consigned to certain lower tasks. However, they remained part of the Jewish people. And the Gemara discusses, why did he even have to do that? They had misrepresented themselves. He made a shvuah, he made a commitment to an inspired nation who had come from afar. They were not that, and therefore he shouldn't have been bound at all whatsoever by this shvuah. Says the Gemara that the reason why he didn't kill them was because of Kiddush Hashem. It was because of Kiddush Hashem. And we get that same sense here in this story, where Yaakov Avinu worries about Lahavisheni, about spoiling the appearance of the Jewish people in the eyes of the nations. Does that yet answer the question? We still have the same question. Yaakov Avinu did things like this. But there is a difference. And the fundamental difference is the following, that in both of these contexts, this was not simply how much sheep would Yaakov Avinu get from his cousin, the employer. It was not just a question even of being able to gain the earthly blessings which Yitzchak Avinu was doing. In both of these cases, these were nations that were lining up ostensibly to join the Jewish people. They were coming to join Klal Yisrael. This wasn't simply a separate transaction to worry about something, to make sure something is taken care of. It's not like where, for example, we also have in this week's parsha where Esav says, hey, I'll come with you, I'll accompany you, and Yaakov wants to shake him, so he says, you go ahead, I'll catch up to you. That was not a religious context, it wasn't a religious experience. It was simply a discussion about how to proceed, and there Yaakov Avinu has the ability, has the right to shade the truth in order to be able to arrive at that necessary goal. Again, we must be extremely cautious and careful about applying such things, but that's the principle which we're taught there. But here, this is a nation that's coming to join with Klal Yisrael, whether the people of Shechem becoming like one nation, having the bris milah, which was meant to be an expression of dedication to the world of the spirit, which Klal Yisrael represented, to the point that it would be shameful for anybody who didn't have that to be associated with them. When it comes to building within a framework of what's supposed to be Torah and supposed to be truth and supposed to be Klal Yisrael, there are no compromises that can be made. There's no excuse, oh, but they deceived me, so therefore I'm going to somehow deceive them back. There, where we are tasked with building the paradigm, the model of what a Torah is supposed to look like, what a Torah nation, a Torah society is supposed to look like, there are no justifications. And there's an indication of this as well from the Gemara. The Gemara Maseches Shavuos, Daf Lamed Aleph, where the Gemara brings a whole bunch of examples of midvar sheker tirchak, which in fact many Rishonim seem to hold, originally applies to the Bezdin. And let me just give you one example which demonstrates it. 3 people are owed a combination of $100 by one person, but they have no witnesses. They're just 3 claimants. So they decide one of them will be the claimant, the other 2 will come in and act as eidim, act as witnesses. They know what they're claiming is true. The defendant, if they just came and claimed, would argue back and would lie. So they'll come and they will lie. One of them will say, he owes me $100, lie. The other 2 will say, we are witnesses that he owes that person $100, lie. But in order to be able to accomplish a justified end, an absolutely justified end, and that is because this man owes the 3 of them $100. The 3 of them will act together. They'll get the $100. They'll divide it, and then truth will prevail. But the Gemara says you can't do that. Midvar sheker tirchak, and the reason is because it might be one thing if they were doing this in their backyard. It's another thing to use the Bezdin. The Bezdin is supposed to be the place of judgment. B'kerev Elokim Yishpot, the place where God resides. When we build the institutions of Torah, of Jewish life, of Klal Yisrael, there's no such thing as the end justifies the means. It is specifically there that we have to make sure that it represents everything that the Torah stands for. In a Bezdin, we can't do these tricks. It's in the street, transactional. On Esav's terrain, there's a notion of, as the pasuk says in Tehillim, as Rashi quoted in last week's parsha, im ikesh titapo, with the one who is twisted, you may be able to act twisted. But on your terrain, building the framework of Klal Yisrael, it must be pure, it must be pristine, it must be perfect, it must reflect every ounce of integrity.